Okay, so as advertised in class, we're moving on to 11.6, and we're going to be factoring these quadratic trinomials when we've got a leading coefficient that's bigger than 1. So we are now going to have some sort of a value, some sort of positive number out in front of our squared term. So these are the steps for the process that makes it a little bit easier to do, I think, as opposed to just guessing and checking, right? So we talked about this a little bit in class as we went through the example. So the first step is going to be to find the product of A times C. Okay? And then we're going to take that product of A times C, whatever that number is, and find factors of that number that add up to B, the number in the middle. So it's very similar to what we were doing before. Then we're going to take the B, rewrite B as the sum of those two factors. So instead of having a 10x in the middle, I might have 2x plus 5x. Or excuse me, 2x plus 8x. And then we're going to do what's called factor by grouping, which is going to be a little bit new. And then again, we're going to think of it as taking out the greatest common factor of those two things that we end up with. Okay? So it's kind of confusing, just the steps by themselves. So we'll look at some examples and see if it helps to clear it up. All right, so first example, 5x squared plus 11x plus 2. So the first step is to multiply A times C. So 5 times 2 gives me 10. And now I want to break down 10 into two factors of 10 that will add to give me this 11 in the middle. Okay. So 10 times 1 will give me the 11. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take that 11x and I'm going to split it into a 10x plus 1x. Okay. So see here in the middle, we've split that 11x and made it 10 plus 1. So now here comes the grouping part. We're going to group these together, first two and last two, and factor out the greatest common factor of each group. So in the first group, I can factor out a 5x, which will leave me with an x plus 2. Now in the second group, the x and the 2, the only thing I could divide both of those by would be 1. Leaving me with just the x plus 2 in the parentheses. Now if all this gets done correctly, we should always end up with the same thing in each group of parentheses. So now if we think about taking out the common factor again, the common factor is x plus 2, and when I pull that x plus 2 away from those pieces, I'm left with a 5x and a plus 1, and there's my two factors. So let's look at the next problem. 4n squared minus 8n plus 3. So again, step 1, multiply A times C. So that gives me 12. And now I want to break down 12 into two factors that would add to give me a negative 8. So I'm looking at negative 2 times negative 6. That gives me positive 12. But adds up to negative 8. So again, the next step is we're going to take the minus 8n and we're going to split it to minus 2n and minus 6n so that we've got those four terms, and again we're going to group. Okay. So in the first group, I've got a common factor of 2n, which leaves behind a 2n minus 1. Now, since I've got a subtraction here in the middle, I'm going to leave the minus sign. 6 and 3 have a common factor of 3. Okay, when I factor that out, 6 divided by 3 would leave me with a 2n. But now I have to look at this as a positive 3, and factoring out a negative 3 gives me a minus 1. So here's my commonality again, my common factor again of 2n minus 1. And when I pull those away, I'm left with a 2n minus 3. And there's my factors. Okay. So hopefully this is starting to make a little bit of sense. So we'll go through another one here. 3x squared plus 4x minus 15. So I'm going to start 3 times negative 15. I get negative 45. So now I need two numbers that multiply to negative 45. But add up to positive 4. So I'm going to go with 9 and negative 5. So I'm going to come back and I'm going to take my 4x and rewrite it as 9x minus 5x. Notice again, if I were just to subtract here, I would end up right back where I started from. So I really haven't changed the overall value here. And now we're going to go back to grouping. So in the first two terms, I have a common factor of 3x, which would leave me a 3x, okay, and or excuse me, not 3x, oops, made a mistake there, would leave me with an x and a plus 3. And in the second group, I'll be able to take a negative 5, which will leave me with an x, and negative 15 divided by negative 5 is plus 3. So now I see I've got a common factor of x plus 3, and when I pull that factor away, I'm left with a 3x and a minus 5. And there are my two factors. So what is the factored form of 10x squared plus 31x minus 14? Okay. Now what makes this one a little more challenging is that I'm going to get larger values. So when I start out and take my a times c, I've got a negative 140. So I'm going to have to come up with some values that are going to multiply to 140, okay, but are going to add up to 31. Okay. So 140 is a bit of a larger number. So I'm going to start thinking about factors. Well, the first one that would jump out would be 14 and 10. But no matter what I do with those, I can't get them to total 31. So I know those are out. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start dividing by each number. Okay, so if I wanted 140 divided by 2, that would be 70. But there's nothing I can do there that makes it 31. So then I'm going to go to 3. Well, when I do that, I'm going to get 46 and 2/3. Well, that doesn't work because they're not both whole numbers. They're not integers. Okay, so 4. If I take 140 divided by 4, I get 35. Well, those two I can get to be 31. If I make it negative 4 and positive 35, so that I still get my negative 140, they also give me a positive 31. So now I'm going to replace my 10, make sure I put the right notation on here, 10x squared, and I'm going to replace the 31x with minus 4x and plus 35x and minus 14. And then I'm going to go back to my grouping. So 10x squared minus 4x, the common factor there is going to be 2x, which will leave me with 5x minus 2. Plus 35 and 14 have a common factor of 7, which would leave me with 5x minus 2. So there's 5x minus 2 that they have in common, and when I pull that common factor out, I'm left with a 2x and a plus 7. Okay? So sometimes when you get a little bit larger value from your a times c, it may take a little bit more work, okay, to figure out what those factors are that are going to work. But remember, if this trinomial can be factored following these steps, this method will always work. Okay? If we couldn't come up with anything over here as factors of 140 that still gave me 31 when I combined them, then I would know that this doesn't factor at all. Okay? So the area of a rectangle is 2x squared minus 13x minus 7. What are the possible dimensions of the rectangle? So this is just like the other problems we were doing. The only difference is I've got to go through these steps to try to factor here. So 2 times negative 7 gives me negative 14. So what numbers are going to multiply to negative 14 but add up to negative 13? Well, negative 14 and positive 1. So I'm going to rewrite as 2x squared minus 14x plus 1x and minus 7. Now I'm going to group, and when I group, I can factor out a 2x, which leaves an x minus 7, x and minus 7, the only thing I can divide both of them by is 1, leaving behind the x minus 7. So there's my common factor again, making x minus 7 the first factor, and 2x plus 1 the second factor. Okay. And it says possible dimensions. So remember, we're talking about length and width. So I'm going to say that the length is x minus 7 and the width is 2x plus 1. That's 7. That would be 1. Okay. So remember, it doesn't matter which one I assign to the length and which one I assign to the width, as long as I've assigned each dimension to one of those factors. Alright, so I would like you to try these 3 and have these done when you come to class, and we will go over those before we start on the assignment. We'll see you then.